The Colorado Avalanche have two big issues hanging over their head. Seattle Kraken look to retool while the Carolina Hurricanes deal with some changes in their lineup. All that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss a show. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Avalanche, Kyle Sullivan. And Kyle, it hasn't been the busiest offseason so far for the Avalanche, but maybe there's a little bit more than meets the eye here. Let's start off with what has happened so far this offseason.
What has happened is the Avalanche they've made the moves they need to make to get a team on the ice. And if you're looking for news when it comes to the Colorado Avalanche on the ticker, on the bottom of whatever sports channel you're watching, I'll tell you, you're not going to find it because there are two elephants that are hanging over the room in Colorado, and that is the contract of Gabe Landeskog, and that is the contract of Valeri Nichushkin. There's not a lot that the Avs can do with those contracts right now, and both are huge question marks. The Avs are currently over the cap, so by the time you hear this episode, something might happen where they get themselves back to cap compliance, but the Avs are really having to go bargain hunting to put a team together, and that's why you see the Avs getting the boys back together, just going out and signing like TJ Tynan, former Avalanche that know the system and that are on the cheap. You're not expecting a lot. You have Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Cale Makar. When you have those three, you're locked up. And they signed Casey Middlestat. They made the proper moves to put a top six together. But when it comes to depth, it's between the Colorado Eagles stepping up in preseason and training camp and these tiny little moves just to see what could possibly happen.
So let's take those two, shadows hanging over the Avs' heads one at a time. What is going on with Landeskog? Is it possible he's done as a player, or is he going to give this another try?
See, this is why you pick the right co-host of Locked On Avalanche. If you ask my friend Chris Maselli, he would say, just wait it out. The captain's coming back. He's said that last year and the year before. And for all the Locked On NHL viewers, Gabe Landeskog has not played a shift of hockey since he lifted the Stanley Cup in 2022. That's right. That is a long time. We're going into year 3. I am of the mindset that I don't think he can get back to NHL caliber hockey. He's going under experimental surgery to fix his knee that he was getting ready to and had a setback and had to readjust. So asking the captain to come back under that contract and not just play hockey, but play Colorado Avalanche hockey, which, by the way, it's built on speed on a shaky knee. That's a lot to ask. So the jury's still out on if he's going to actually make it back. At the preseason press conference he had with general manager Chris McFarland, he was still dodgy on when he's coming back, and we're going into year 3. So how long are the Avalanche going to be waiting? It's the captain. Gabe Landeskog means everything to his team, so they're going to wait forever, but it's iffy on what he can actually bring when he comes back.
Now, first of all, obviously, if he's not ready, you have LTIR that will give you some cap relief, but that can't happen right away.
No, and that's where McFarland, Landeskog, and honestly, Jared Bednar will have to sit down and have a conversation where, is this LTIR? Is this retirement? Can you do 3 more years? Like, there's a lot of questions that come around this surgery, and there's no guarantee that he's coming back to even be 40% or 50%. Everybody's kind of gravitating to these clips that you see of him on the ice for 10 to 15 seconds, taking very basic maneuvers on the ice. And we're all losing our mind that he's coming back. Just wait, he's coming back. That was littered through last season. And this is, again, year 3. We're asking a lot of the captain, and he's also a smart guy. And if he can't do it, I think he knows the state the team is in financially, and he will make the right decision. But will LTIR be used? I think it would be more retirement before LTIR.
And is there a timetable at all for when an announcement may come?
Well, from Landeskog himself in the press conference, he turns and says, when does the season start? Somewhere between there and maybe December. And if we're going into year 3 still saying maybe on a return date, that should tell you more than circling a date on the calendar. He still doesn't know.
Yeah, it's got to be a very difficult situation for sure. And how about Nichushkin? What's going on there?
Oh, you tell me and we'll both know. With Valeri Nichushkin, he went into stage 3, the players' assistance program during the playoffs. He took a hot test and was removed because he already entered the assistance program mid-season. This is coming off of taking time away from the team in Seattle the year before during the playoffs. So Valeri Nichushkin's had his off-the-ice battles, but the Avs really can't do much when it comes to this contract because General Manager Chris McFarland, he said himself, they have explored every option on what to do with this contract. And there's nothing they can do under the program until he's possibly reinstated in November. The season starts in October, everyone. November, that contract is sitting out there, and they can't do anything about it, which also makes things weird because he is making an appearance back home in Russia, playing in a charity league. And so what the players program actually does and what it protects and what it's doing, I'm really not sure. But if you want to see Valeri Nichushkin, he's back home in Russia playing hockey. But when it comes to what he can bring to the Avalanche, it's nothing until November if he's reinstated.
And if until he's reinstated, he does not count against the cap?
That's our belief. Me and my co-host Chris Maselli, we are still, and the Avs management, we're still all kind of unsure how this process is going and how it works and the legality on if they can walk away, like what grants contract termination. There's a lot of questions that everybody's figuring out as they go. And with it being the off season, there's no press for importance here. So the Avs are just understanding that he will come back in November, and that's how they're operating. If they keep him, that's another question. But those are between Landeskog and Nichushkin, they're acting like both of them are coming back.
Well, how then do they address the remaining needs that this team has between now and training camp?
Well, you expect maybe another move or two in the system. I know going into free agency, names like Ross Colton were thrown out there, Josh Manson and Sam Girard. So maybe one of those names are moved. It's interesting, especially with the moves they're making and all these tiny little pieces they're adding to the team. You're just automatically looking at the largest contracts on the team and where you're working from there. Keep in mind, next year, Mikko Rantanen is up for a new deal as well.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And I mean, this just sounds like a very difficult situation all the way around. I mean, how does this affect the team psychologically? The players have got to have a lot of uncertainty hanging over their heads.
Well, the team is optimistic, especially with the way they exited last season, feeling like they left so much on the table. And with the exit of Valeri Nichushkin, it was a little bit galvanizing for some of the players. And you could hear in the comments that this team really bonded in the playoffs. And you're expecting through this offseason that they really band together and know it's going to be a tough season, that you can't go out and sign a Band-Aid to get you to the trade deadline or to the end of the season until these contracts are dealt with. So they're going to have to band together, and you're expecting this team to be a little bit more resilient. But they know help is not on the way. It's on them.
All right. Well, I know you and your co-host will have it covered every step of the way. Kyle, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find the both of you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast. We are on YouTube or anywhere you find your podcast. Just search Locked On Avalanche, where this week we're doing crossovers with all of our Central Division foes. So you get both sides of these matchups that you'll see all year long. So you can check us out there, and you can check us out on all the socials. Just search Locked On Avalanche, or you can find me anywhere you look at Shaggy Von Doom.
All right, Kyle, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
It's always an honor, my friend.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with more than 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard it about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face to Locked On NHL viewers and a familiar voice for Locked On NHL listeners, Erica Ayala of Locked On Kraken. And Erica, it certainly hasn't been quiet in Seattle over the last few weeks.
It hasn't. And Gil, we've talked about this before on the show. We've been waiting for the Seattle Kraken to make some moves, particularly in the off season. And they got the off season started even before we could sign free agents. And that is, of course, getting rid of our first ever head coach, Dave Hakstol, and bringing in Dan Bylsma, who is in the middle of a playoff run with our AHL affiliate, the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And so that, I think, kind of was indicative that there were going to be some moves that were going to be made for the Seattle Kraken. That's a significant change. We've seen little tweaks here and there, but for me, that's like, all right, we're going into this offseason to do something. And then on the first day of free agency, we get Montour from the Florida Panthers, and then Chandler Stevenson from the Vegas Golden Knights. So between Brendan and Chandler, I think what you see is not just a defenseman that can run on the power play, not just a centerman, but also some players that can move with speed, that are good skaters. And we know that that's what Dan Bylsma has said that he wants to see in Seattle, but it's also just his philosophy and how he sees the game. Now, with respect to other moves, I think they've been small. And I'm not sure how significant they will be, at least not for the Seattle Kraken in the long term. And that's because a lot of them had to do with our AHL team, who again made the Calder Cup final for the second season, lost for the second season on a road to Hershey. So there's definitely movement. Now, where the chips fall and if this will be a team that can produce on the ice better, especially than they did last year, for me, at least, Gil, that might still be up in the air.
As far as the hiring of Bylsma, were you pleased with it? And other than an emphasis on speed, what do you think he adds to this team? Maybe more in the long run, even than in the short run.
Yeah, I think when Dave Hakstol was dismissed, I understood the move. I felt that maybe some other things, especially maybe from the front office and with the roster, could have been changed as well and keep Dave in. But ultimately, yes, when Dan was named the replacement for Dave Hakstol, there's continuity there. To me, it signaled that we're likely to see some of the players that we've been developing, whether that's in the AHL or other areas and pockets of our development pipeline, that we're going to see them. And that goes into the second part of your question, Gil. I think that I know for a fact, Dan Bylsma has mentioned it time and time again, that not only, again, does he want to play fast, I think there's an emphasis on being able to improve special teams, but the underlying philosophy is that there's always something for this roster to learn, whether they're coming up for the first time or they are veterans, all-stars, Stanley Cup champions. And to me, that's almost like a reset of culture that's going to be happening. That's the expectation that I have. And Dan Bylsma, he's a fun guy. His nickname is Disco, at least in part because of his dance moves. He likes to get down, and he can also get serious. And I get the sense that Dave Haxtell at times perhaps had a little bit of difficulty. He's a very kind of monotonous, monotone type guy. And I think you sometimes need someone that can help, sometimes, honestly, Gil, instigate the highs and the fun while also being able to quickly and efficiently rein in the focus. And I get the sense that Dan Bylsma has that. He also has an emphasis on, as I was mentioning, development. And that's where Jessica Campbell in particular comes into play. She's talked a lot, and other elite level NHLers, women's hockey players have talked about how she is firm. And she's going to hold you to task. And what's also going to happen is that you're going to get better. And doesn't that sound exactly like what we need the Seattle Kraken to do?
Yeah, and a little history there, obviously, in the making also. So that's always a plus. And you mentioned some, the desire to bring up some players from the pipeline with Bylsma. Is there any one or two in particular who you think he's really focusing on?
Well, I think that there's two players that I think we can point to just based off what we saw last season. The first one, great story, and Dan always gives credit, to Jessica Campbell for developing Ty Cartier. Came into the pipeline, into the franchise undrafted, was able to make the AHL squad at the halfway point in his rookie season as a pro, really turned a corner, becomes rookie of the year in the AHL, and was able to be a really important piece to a very battered Seattle Kraken team last season. So I'm expecting that we'll see Ty Cartier in the lineup, probably a bottom six role for him. The other player that we saw in the AHL last season, and then who returned to Coachella Valley to make their long run in the playoffs, is Riker Evans. So Ty Cartier, a winger, and Riker Evans, a defenseman. I know that we just didn't have the space roster-wise, and I think you were dealing with a few players who are no longer with the organization now, in Brian Dumoulin and Justin Schultz, who, of course, are veterans. And having maybe difficult conversations, moving them around. Both had been healthy scratches for a while Evans was finding his stride. So I do expect Cartier and Evans to be in the lineup and to make the Seattle Kraken roster. Another player very likely, though not as proven, is, of course, Shane Wright. Now, Shane had an injury that left him out of the playoffs in the AHL run leading up to the finals, the Calder Cup finals. And I think in that series against Hershey, it took him a little bit of time after, getting injured in I believe it was the Ontario Reign series, just to get acclimated. But you saw the growth. Once he was back comfortable, was getting back into the flow with his teammates, you saw how he can be a playmaker. You saw how he can be a sniper, a good shooter, has a knack for the front of the net. And that's exactly what the Seattle Kraken, again, need. Probably going to be with Cartier. Again, bottom six, we're thinking. A lot of projections think that Tanev will likely be with those two young players, with Wright, of course, centering. So those are the players that we're expecting. And, barring any surprises, I'm not sure that we'll see too many other players, make that opening roster for the Seattle Kraken.
So with training camp a couple of months away, what is your biggest concern about this roster heading into camp?
I think once again, the Seattle Kraken have a lot of question marks when it comes to goaltending and honestly, the viability. We have seen a great version of Philip Grubauer. We have seen Joey Daccord take that second spot from Chris Driedger, who now returned to the Florida Panthers organization. And then while Joey Daccord was with the NHL team, the Kraken, Grubauer again gets hurt, and Joey Daccord takes over that number one spot. Now, who's going to be our number one going in? Honestly, I don't know. I think Joey Daccord has done well enough where you can't make a guarantee that it's going to be Grubauer. The thing with Grubauer that we talk about a lot is that's a lot of contract. That's a lot of salary cap. That's a long-term commitment to not have him be the number one or to have a true tandem. And that, honestly, Gil, is probably what I want to see more, regardless of who the two goaltenders are. We've overworked our goaltenders, some of that because of circumstance. But Martin Jones was great for us. It was short-lived, but he had to step in. Joey Daccord has been great for us. And then that fatigue, I think, hit later in the season. And I think although people want to argue the analytical numbers regarding the Seattle Kraken and their defense, when Joey Daccord was less than stellar, less than perfect, you saw the holes immediately in all zones up and down the ice of the Seattle Kraken, just not able to keep pace with some of the higher offensive teams in the league because they're mediocre at best, in my opinion, from my eye test when it comes to defense. And to go back to Bylsma, not only the hustle, the fast way he wants to play, but the forechecking and intensity that he's expecting, I do expect that will improve under Dan Bylsma, just really being able to get after it. We're not a very disciplined team. We haven't been a disciplined team defensively, so that might be something else that we see. And again, if we're not, it's going to show, and we're going to fatigue our goaltenders once again.
All right. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Erica, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Of course. Well, just like every other show in the Locked On Podcast Network, you can find Locked On Kraken on YouTube and your favorite audio platform. You can also find us, on Amazon ad-free, which is pretty cool. And as for the show, you can find us at Locked On Kraken on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, or X if you prefer. And, you can also find me at Erica_L_Ayala.
All right, Erica, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Hurricanes, Zachary Martin. And Zach, first of all, it's great to talk to you when our two teams are not going head-to-head in a playoff series. So good to see you. And certainly been a very busy offseason for the Canes. Let's start with some of the guys that departed Raleigh, which I think was kind of expected, but not necessarily easy.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, thank you, Gil, as always, for the invite. It's always fun to talk to you on the Locked On AHL, as always. It's been a interesting offseason, to say the least. I know with a lot of cap restrictions coming up, I know the cap did go up, but a lot of guys weren't going to get paid. You thought maybe a couple were going to leave, but just the fact of how many left and how quick it happened, too, does come as a shock, as you're talking Teuvo Teravainen, and you lost one of your top six guys. You lose your entire second D pair in Brady Shea and Brett Pesce. You also lose your Swiss Army knife, of Stefan Asen, who is your bottom six guy, but who can also play on the power play too, because he's your net front presence guy. So yeah, a lot of departures really quickly, and it's a lot of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic on the fly, if you really want to look at it that way. So yeah, it's day one of free agency was a little bit chaotic, and it was caused just not how the Hurricanes wanted it to be caused. That's for sure.
And, Rod Brindamore was pretty frank about it, that he was not thrilled with losing all of these players.
Yeah, and it's rightfully so. And yeah, it's tough because he even says, you don't want to get those phone calls of guys that you've had for a long time. Brett Pesce was drafted by the team. Him and Jacob Slavin were the top D pair through pretty much the back end of the dark ages before Rod Brindamore became the head coach of the team. and stuff like that. You got Brady Shea in a trade, back in 2020, basically was one of the offensive standouts for the blue line and stuff like that. Teuvo Teravainen's been with the team for 8 seasons now. So yeah, you're losing a lot of guys you kind of leaned on for a good part of the last 6 seasons, and at various times. So yeah, it's not good when you have a lot of guys leaving, especially too when you lose your GM, president, and all that too, and what else. Yeah, a lot of changes in the first few weeks of the offseason for sure.
So how does the team address this? Who steps up to fill these voids?
Mm-hmm. Well, luckily the Hurricanes, while they did lose guys, they also did get a lot of guys in free agency as well. You got Sean Walker to a 5-year deal, really good AAV. I think it's like 3.6. You go get Shane Gostisbehere back. We already saw what he did in his limited time with the Hurricanes in 22-23. Dig into the trade deadline from the Arizona Coyotes for like a draft pick, and that was really about it. Played really well, threw him on the power play unit, did a good job as well. Now you got him locked in for 3 seasons at 3.2. So you got your Brett Pesce replacement in Sean Walker, and you get your Brady Shea replacement in Shane Gostisbehere. And Ghost had a really good season. Stats, if you look at the stats comparables, Ghost had a better stats-wise season than Brady Shea did. And the fact that too is you also lock in Jalen Chatfield for 3 seasons as well. So those 3 guys combined of Gostisbehere, Chatfield, and Walker, they all came in at around $10 million, where Shea and Pesce, 12.5, respectively, for those two, what their teams they went to. So, yeah, you knew those guys were going to get paid. Unfortunately, you couldn't keep them at the price they wanted in those certain terms, but you got great replacements in guys who are kind of younger, and you can give them a good AAV. So, yeah, it's just trying to find guys who are that good caliber on cheaper-ish deals that kind of work out that gives you the flexibility, because right now the Hurricanes still sit at $6 million in cap space still. So all in all, not too bad, all things considered, for Eric Tulsky and his welcome to NHL free agency as the head honcho of the Carolina Hurricanes are off the rip. So yeah, it's been definitely a wild one.
How do you feel he's done so far as the new GM? And then what do you expect to be different under his tutelage than under the past regime?
I think so far he's done pretty good, for the fact that you look at how you go from the exit interviews of the Hurricanes to not too long after they got eliminated from the playoffs, and then a week later Don Waddell's gone, and then he's an interim, having to go through your first draft, then you go through your first free agency, and you still go and get guys that you need a replacement. You get Jack Roslovic. You also get the depth players of Eric Robinson, Tyson Jost, stuff like that, Riley Stillman. I think he's done a pretty good job overall. In terms of how the regime is going to be, he's even said it too, and even assistant general manager Darren York even addressed it too, is there's no really a difference in how they do things. It's still a collaborative effort with them, Rod, Tom Dundon, and stuff like that. Now there's they added some extra bodies into kind of fill the void of a few other things as well. The fact that with Eric Tulsky moving up, you got to figure out what you want to do with your head, the head of the pro scouts. That's what Eric Tulsky did. You also got head of analytics and stuff like that too. So it's just kind of trying to get the extra bodies to come in and kind of fill in some spots. But other than that, the philosophy is not really changing. They have their own way of addressing players and looking at analytics, what terms of contracts and stuff but it's still a collaborative effort. It's just a different name under GM, and then just going on from there.
Right now, we're still a couple of months away from the season or from training camp. What's your biggest concern facing this team?
I see right now is just trying to figure out what terms and what your contracts you're looking at for your 3 restricted free agents, because you still got Jack Drew as an RFA who's going to arbitration. Same thing for Martin Necas. Early on, Gil, I know you probably know, everyone and their mother has talked about Martin Necas. Who do you want to go trade for him? What can be the asking price? Now, apparently, he's also going to arbitration with the Canes. It sounds like he does kind of want to stay. I guess they're trying to figure out, do you get a deal done before that, or do you go to arbitration? So who knows what's going on with that situation overall. And then you got to worry about Seth Jarvis. Now, he's not arbitration eligible, but he did get a qualifying offer. Now it's, do you bring him a bridge, or do you give him a full-term 7-8 year deal? And I've suggested go down the middle, give him a 5-year deal, take him until he's 27, because Sebastian Aho got his contract at 26. Why give it to Seth at 27 and give him that 7-8 year deal then when he's 27? You got him locked in until he's 34, 35. He's a Hurricane for life. So my main concern right now, lock up your 3 RFAs because you got your first and second right wing spots open and your fourth center. You bring those 3 guys back, forward core is done. Throw Jack Roslovic to the left side in your second line. And there you go. There's your 12 guys for the forwards, and you already know who your healthy got, your extra scratches are at that point. So lock up your RFAs. That's the last thing you really got to worry about at this point if you're the Hurricanes.
So from your perspective right now, is this a better team than the team that finished last season, or is it too early to tell?
Oh, geez. That's a good question. I think it's still a little too early to tell. Will I think that they're going to be fighting for the division? Maybe. I would still be optimistic that they could win the division, but I'm more so on they're going to make the playoffs still for the 7th straight time. I think that is still doable for the Hurricanes. I think it's very, very likely it's going to happen. It's just, are you looking at second or third in the division? I'm not really sure. It's just depending on how New Jersey does and how the rest of the division looks as well. So they might have taken a slight step back because they've also talked about maybe looking at some of their youngsters like Felix Sorum, Bradley Nadeau, Jackson Blake. Do we see those guys come up at some point? So it's just it's a lot of unknowns right now, but I'd still say this is still a playoff team. It's just where in the terms of the division they're going to be at. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. I think it's, like I said, it's a little bit of a dip if you really want to look at it, but overall, this is still a playoff team.
All right. Zach, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, pretty simple. I'm on X at OneTrueZach. I have a link tree if you want to look up all my articles that I do and along with where to find the podcast. The podcast on X, it's LO_Hurricanes. And you can check out where to watch and listen on there every Monday through Friday. We'll have links to, go check it out. So, yeah.
All right. Zach, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Hey, as always, thanks, Gil. Really appreciate this.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guests, Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche, Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken, and Zachary Martin of Locked On Hurricanes for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. We are here every Monday through Friday bringing you the biggest stories from around the league, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode of Locked On NHL. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.